My father ordered me to cook Christmas dinner for my brother's 25 guests like I was hired help, but he forgot one thing. The kitchen equipment was mine, the grocery order was under my catering company, and the house he called his venue only still had a roof because I had paid for it. My name is Elara Whitcomb, and by the time my brother told his friends I was basically the maid they did not have to pay, I had already booked a one-way ticket to Maui. Chapter 1 The Christmas Order. Christmas 2024 was the first Christmas in 13 years that I did not stand in my parents' kitchen with flour on my wrists, dishwater burning my hands, and somebody asking me if the turkey was almost done. My name is Elara Whitcomb. I was 33 years old, living alone at Maple Glen Apartments, 38 minutes from my parents' house in Brookhaven, Ohio. By day I worked as a bookkeeper at Hale & Bricker Accounting. By night and most weekends I helped run Whitcomb Table Catering LLC, a small catering company I owned 50-50 with my best friend, Nora Castillo. So when my father looked at me on December 22, 2024, and told me my brother Troy was bringing 25 guests to Christmas dinner, I knew exactly what he was really saying. He was not asking if I could help, he was assigning me a shift. My father, Raymond Whitcomb, was 64, a retired floor supervisor from Lakeview Farm Equipment Warehouse, and the kind of man who believed a request became respectful if he said it in a calm voice. He stood near the refrigerator in his flannel shirt, one hand on his coffee mug, talking as if Christmas dinner had already been planned and I had simply forgotten to receive my instructions. Troy will have some people over Christmas Day, he said. Nothing fancy, just family style. My brother Troy stood behind him in a new navy shirt, smiling like a man who had already delegated the hard part of his life to someone else. Troy was 36, sold trucks at a dealership off Route 9, and had been living in my parents' basement since 2018. He did not pay rent in any consistent way. He did not buy groceries unless beer counted. He did not cook, clean, host, or notice when other people did. I asked how many people. Troy shrugged and said about 25, maybe 31 if everyone showed. My father took a sip of coffee and said it was only Christmas dinner. I had done it before. That was the thing about my family. They never called it labor if I was the one doing it. They called it tradition. They called it helping out. They called it what family does. But if a stranger asked Whitcomb Table Catering for the same meal, they would have needed a head count, a signed agreement, a deposit, dietary notes, a delivery schedule, and a final invoice. My family gave me none of that. They gave me a list. Nora and I had built Whitcomb Table Catering in 2020, one weekend job at a time. She handled operations, deliveries, temporary staff, and the van. I handled books, menus, costing, and most of the cooking. We had invoices, insurance, an inventory list, and professional equipment that had taken us years to buy. Chafing dishes, warming trays, insulated carriers, a commercial mixer, sheet pans, prep tables, a carving station. People paid us because the work had value, but inside my parents' house at 1148 Sycamore Lane, the same work became something I owed. I did not hate cooking. That was the part my family always used against me. I loved the smell of butter browning in a pan. I loved the quiet rhythm of chopping onions. I loved watching strangers take the first bite of something I had made and go still for half a second because it tasted like comfort. I loved cooking when it was a choice, when it was respected, when it ended with payment or gratitude or at least someone else washing the dishes. What I hated was being scheduled like staff by people who still called it love. My mother, Deborah Whitcomb, was 62. She had worked the cafeteria line at Brookhaven Elementary for nearly 30 years, and arthritis had bent her fingers slightly at the knuckles. She was not cruel. That was what made her harder to stay angry at. She was soft, tired, and trained by decades of marriage to keep the peace by absorbing the noise. If my father wanted coffee, she stood up before he finished the sentence. If Troy left a plate on the table, she carried it to the sink without looking at him. If I complained, she lowered her voice and reminded me that I knew how my father got. And Troy was the golden child in a house where gold did not mean valuable. It meant untouchable. When I was 14, My grandmother June taught me to make pecan pie. She had hands that always smelled faintly of cinnamon and dish soap. She died in 2011, and after she was gone, the kitchen seemed to turn its attention toward me. At first I was just helping, then I was making the pies, then the sides, then the turkey, then Easter, then Thanksgiving, then Christmas. Then birthdays, 4th of July, Mother's Day, Father's Day, family barbecues, Sunday dinners, and every last-minute gathering where someone said I only needed to bring one dish and somehow I ended up making the main course. By Christmas 2024, I had cooked 136 family meals. I knew the number because I was a bookkeeper. Numbers did not forget what people tried to soften with words. And I had tried to say no. In 2016, I told my parents I could not cook Easter because Hale and Bricker had a deadline and I was already working late every night. My father did not yell. He simply stopped speaking to me for 12 days. My mother called me crying and said I had hurt him. In 2019, after Thanksgiving, I asked Troy to wash the dishes. He disappeared into the basement before I finished the sentence. My father told me not to embarrass my brother in front of relatives. In 2021, when grocery prices were climbing and I was buying most of the holiday food myself, I suggested everyone contribute. My father looked at me like I had passed a collection plate at a funeral, and said family does not charge family. After a while you stop calling it giving in, you call it surviving the holiday. That Thanksgiving, 1 month before everything broke, I cooked for 17 people. I started before sunrise and spent the whole morning moving between the stove, the oven, and the sink. By the time everyone sat down, my back ached and my hair smelled like sage and hot oil. My cousin Lisa Caldwell took one bite of the pecan pie and asked if it was Grandma June's recipe. Before I could answer, Troy leaned back in his chair and said it was a Whitcomb family recipe, like he had ever rolled a crust or measured corn syrup in his life. My father raised his glass and thanked everyone for coming to our home, our table, our family, not my daughter, who had been on her feet since 5:30, not Ilara, who bought the pecans, not Ilara, who made sure there was enough food for Uncle Marsha's blood sugar and Lisa's picky teenagers and Troy's second plate. After dinner, the men moved toward football, the kids scattered, and I stood at the sink for more than 2 hours. My mother dried plates beside me, her hands red and swollen from hot water. I said Troy could help. She glanced toward the living room, where my father was laughing at the game, and said softly that I knew how he got. That was when something in me went quiet, not angry, not dramatic, just quiet. I looked at my mother, at her bent fingers wrapped around a towel, and saw the future waiting for me. A woman so needed she no longer knew whether she was loved. Then came December 22. Troy was not just bringing friends. He was bringing Melanie Harding, his girlfriend of 4 months, along with her parents, Jean and Linda Harding, her younger sister Claire, and several people from the dealership. The Hardings owned Harding Insurance. They were known at First Methodist Brookhaven, at Rotary breakfasts, at every local fundraiser where people smiled with name tags on their coats. Troy needed the dinner to look impressive. He sent me a dietary list as if he were emailing a restaurant. Linda was gluten-free. Jean had a shellfish allergy. Claire was vegan. One guest was diabetic. There were notes about appetizers, desserts, and timing. There was no money attached. There was no please. There was no question about whether I had plans of my own. Just a list glowing on my phone screen, while Troy grinned across the kitchen like he had solved Christmas. My father looked at me and said family comes first. I looked down at the names, the restrictions, the head count, and all I could see was 136 meals, 13 years, and a kitchen that had never once asked if I wanted to sit down. Chapter 2. The audition dinner list stayed on my screen while Troy kept talking, and my mind did what it always did when too many people expected too much from one kitchen. It started building a service plan, 31 people if everyone came, 2 main proteins because my father would say turkey alone looked cheap, a vegan option for Claire Harding, a gluten-free dessert for Linda, no shellfish anywhere near Jean Harding's plate, something lower sugar for the diabetic guest Troy mentioned as an afterthought. appetizers, sides, gravy, rolls, coffee, ice, cleanup, containers for leftovers, and enough seating to make it look like the Whitcombs were the kind of family. Troy wanted the Hardings to believe we were. In my head, I could already see the invoice Whitcomb Table Catering would have sent a real client. Full service holiday rush, 31 guests, special dietary accommodations, equipment, prep, serving, cleanup, and delivery would have landed somewhere between $1,900 and $2,400 before tax. That was being generous. My father had not asked if I had time. Troy had not asked what it would cost. No one had asked whether I had Christmas plans of my own. Deborah sat at the dining table with wrapping paper across her lap, smoothing tape over a box for Troy like he was still 12. I was supposed to be helping her wrap gifts, but all I could see was the grocery math forming behind my eyes. Butter had gone up again. Pecans were worse. Turkey prices were never kind the week of Christmas. Gluten-free flour always cost more than it should. Vegan roast was not something you found at the last minute in Brookhaven unless you were lucky, and luck had never done the dishes in that house. Troy leaned against the counter and scrolled through his phone, pleased with himself. He said Melanie's dad, Gene Harding, knew everyone in local business. Gene played golf with dealership owners, sat on Rotary committees, and could introduce Troy to people who mattered. He said it like this dinner was just another step in his career plan. I asked him what he was contributing. He looked up, genuinely confused, and said he was providing the venue. For a second, the room went so still around me that I heard the refrigerator click on. The venue was my parents' house at 1148 Sycamore Lane, the same house that had almost gone to county tax foreclosure in 2021, when my father had ignored notices until a final letter arrived with red print across the top. I paid $15,700 to clear the property tax lien because Deborah called me from the pantry and whispered that Ray could not know she was scared. In 2022, the furnace died during a cold snap, and I paid $7,450 because my mother's hands had turned blue even inside the house. In 2023, water leaked through the roof and down toward the basement where Troy slept, and I paid $12,300 for the repair because my father said contractors were taking advantage of him. $35,450. I had the bank records. I had the lien release. I had the receipts in a folder on my laptop labeled House Help, because even then I had not wanted to call it what it was. A debt. Troy stood in that house and called it his venue. My phone buzzed before I could answer him. Nora Castillo's name lit up the screen. I stepped into the hallway and took the call. She was in the Whitcomb Table van, judging by the road noise behind her. She said Henderson Tool and Die had confirmed the luncheon for December 27th. 42 guests. If it went well, they wanted to talk about a quarterly contract, maybe $18,000 a year. She needed to check the chafing dishes, the carving station, the commercial mixer, and the insulated carriers in my parents' garage so she could finalize the equipment list. I closed my eyes. Nora knew me well enough to hear what I did not say. She asked if my family was turning Christmas into a free catering job again. I looked back into the dining room. Deborah was folding tissue paper around a sweater Troy had not paid for. Ray was in his chair, talking about borrowing tables from church like tables move themselves. Troy was grinning at his phone. I did not answer. Nora said if Troy wanted full-service catering, he could book Whitcomb Table like everyone else. That sentence lodged somewhere behind my ribs. Like everyone else paid deposits. Everyone else sent head counts. Everyone else signed agreements and said thank you. Everyone else understood that food did not appear because a woman loved them enough to disappear into a kitchen. When I went back in, Deborah had already opened the pantry. She was checking flour, sugar, cinnamon, disposable pans, the way a soldier checks supplies before a battle she never enlisted for. Her fingers were swollen at the knuckles. She reached for a peeler and a bag of potatoes that would not have fed half the people Troy invited. I took the peeler gently from her hand. "Mom," I said, "you do not have to start tonight." She gave me the smile she used when something hurt, but she did not want anyone to rearrange their life around it. She said she was fine. She was not fine. She had not been fine for years. Then she looked down at her hands and said, almost too quietly, that she used to think being needed meant being loved. I could not answer right away, because I knew exactly what she meant. I also knew, with a sudden cold certainty, that she was warning me without meaning to. Later that evening, while I was writing a grocery list at the kitchen island, Troy video called Melanie. He did not move to another room. He wanted me to hear enough to feel important, but not enough to feel respected. Melanie asked if his sister was really doing all of that alone. Troy laughed and said I liked cooking. It was my thing, I ran the kitchen like a pro. Her face on the screen changed just slightly, not enough for Troy to notice but enough for me. She hesitated, then asked if I needed help. Troy waved it off and told her the Whitcombs had a traditional Christmas dinner every year. Traditional. That was the prettiest word people used when they did not want to say unpaid. I still had not decided to leave. That is the truth. Even after the list, even after the venue comment, even after Nora's voice in my ear, some trained part of me kept looking for the smallest sign that my family could still choose differently, so I updated the wholesale order through the Whitcomb table account. Turkey, ham, potatoes, cranberries, butter, cream, produce, gluten-free flour, a vegan roast, ingredients for a diabetic-friendly dessert. The total came to about $640. I told myself it was a backup plan. I told myself if my father asked what he owed or Troy apologized, or my mother said enough, I would find a way to make it fair. No one did. Instead, my father told me Pastor Gregory Miles had agreed to lend 6 folding tables from First Methodist, and that I should pick them up in the morning. I said, Dad, I am not your event coordinator. He looked at me as if I had slapped him with a dish towel. He told me not to start acting selfish 2 days before Christmas. Troy was standing right there. He had a truck, he had legs, he had invited the guests. He did not offer to get the tables. His phone lit up on the counter while he was pouring himself a soda. A message from Wesley Grant, one of his dealership friends, asked if they needed to bring anything. Troy typed back that they did not, that his sister handled the food. Wesley replied that it must be nice having catering in the family. Troy sent a laughing emoji. I stared at that little yellow face longer than I should have. That night, I slept on the old couch in the upstairs den, because I was supposed to start prep early the next morning. The house settled around me. Pipes clicked, the furnace hummed. Downstairs I heard Troy on the phone, his voice low but not low enough. He told Wesley not to bring anything. He said my sister handles all that, she likes cooking. Honestly, she is basically the maid, except we do not have to pay her. I did not move, I did not cry. I did not run downstairs and scream. I reached for my phone in the dark and opened the calculator. 15,700 plus 7,450 plus 12,300, 35,450. Then I typed 136 meals. I cleared the screen. The worst part was that Troy was not entirely wrong. I did like cooking. I liked the careful work of it, the heat, the timing, the way a good meal could make strangers soften. But they had taken the thing I loved and turned it into something I owed. I sat up in the dark and opened my laptop. For the first time that week, I did not open the grocery spreadsheet. I opened my travel fund, then the credit card points I had been saving from 4 years of catering expenses. I stopped calculating how many pounds of potatoes 31 people needed. I started calculating how many miles it would take to leave Ohio. Chapter 3. The ledger and the ticket. By morning, the house had already started pretending nothing had changed. My father was in his chair with the local news on low, drinking coffee like the world existed to refill his mug. Deborah was moving quietly between the pantry and the counter, opening cabinets, closing them again, taking stock of a battle she had not chosen. Troy was still asleep in the basement. Of course he was. The man who had invited 31 people to Christmas dinner was resting up for the inconvenience of being admired. I was standing at the sink, holding a mug of coffee I had not tasted when my father called from the living room. Ilara, go up to the attic and get your grandmother's old baking trays. We might need extra pans. He did not look at me when he said it. That was how orders worked in my father's house. He threw them into the air and trusted a woman would catch them. I set the mug down. Good morning to you too, Dad. He frowned at the television. Don't start, we have a lot to do. That was another word my family used strangely. We meant me. The attic stairs pulled down from the hallway ceiling with a groan. Cold air rolled over my face as I climbed up into the dim space above the house. The attic smelled like dust, cardboard, old insulation, and the faint dry sweetness of Christmas decorations packed away too long. I found the stack of baking trays near a cracked plastic bin of ornaments, but behind them sat a square green tin I had not seen before. The lid was stamped with faded white letters, June Kitchen. For a moment, I just stared at it. My grandmother June had been dead since 2011, but her kitchen had never really left the house. It lived in the spice box on the counter, in the pecan pie recipe everyone claimed and no one but me made, in the way my mother wiped the table twice even after it was clean. I expected recipe cards inside, maybe notes for pie crust, maybe an old church cookbook clipping. What I found was a ledger. It was small, dark blue, with yellowing pages and handwriting slanting carefully across each line. The first pages listed Thanksgiving 1978, Christmas 1978, Easter 1979, guest count, dishes, cost, turkey, ham, rolls, green beans, pies, 12 guests, 18 guests, 22 guests, $62, $112. I turned pages faster. Birthdays, church dinners, family barbecues, Christmas Eve, Easter Sunday, every year the same pattern. Food, people, money, work, near the margins. She had written things that made my throat close. Ray did not enter the kitchen. Deborah helped, looked tired. No one asked what it cost. I sat down on the attic floor with the ledger in my lap. It was not a cookbook. It was not a keepsake. It was a record of a woman trying to prove to herself that her life had weight. My grandmother had counted the meals because no one else counted the hours. The last full page stopped in 2010. At the bottom, under a total written in careful pencil, she had written that she hoped the next girl learned to leave. I read the line 3 times. The next girl, that was not my mother anymore. Deborah had already been swallowed by the kitchen. That was me. I took pictures of the pages with my phone, especially the last one. 162 major meals from 1978 to 2010. 32 years of holidays, birthdays, church dinners, and family gatherings written in columns because love had never been allowed to send an invoice. My hands were shaking when I texted Aunt Ruth. Ruth Gannon was my father's older sister, 68 years old, and the owner of Gannon House Bed and Breakfast in Fairfield. She had left Brookhaven when she was 19 and never moved back. My father called her difficult. My mother called her independent. I had learned those words often meant the same thing depending on who was threatened. I sent her the pictures and wrote only one sentence. I found Grandma June's ledger. She called me before I reached the bottom of the attic stairs. Ilara, where are you? In the attic. Is Ray near you? No. Then, listen to me. That ledger was, your grandmother wrote in it for years. You knew? I knew she kept something. I didn't know she kept that much. I swallowed hard. She wrote 162 meals. Ruth was quiet long enough for me to hear the old house creak around me. Then she said, your grandmother used to cry after Christmas, when everyone left. Not loudly. June never did anything loudly. She would sit at the table with cold coffee and rub her hands like they belonged to someone else. I looked down at my own hands. Why didn't anyone stop it? I left when I was 19 because I thought if I stayed, I would become her. I told myself Deborah had chosen differently. I was wrong. Her voice cracked on the last word. I told her about the 31 guests, about Troy and Melanie Harding, about the venue, about the $35,450 I had paid into that house. Then I told her what Troy had said on the phone. He called me basically the maid. Ruth inhaled sharply. Are you leaving? I looked at the ledger in my lap. I think I am. If you leave, don't leave quietly enough for them to rewrite it. That sentence settled me. After we hung up, I went downstairs with the baking trays in one hand and the ledger hidden under my sweater. My father did not notice that the tin was gone. He barely looked away from the television when I set the trays on the counter. By noon, I had made the decision I should have made years earlier. I booked a one-way flight from John Glenn Columbus International Airport to Kahului, Maui. It left at 1:05 in the morning on December 24th, with a connection through Denver. I used credit card points I had built up through catering expenses and a travel fund I had been too guilty to touch. The flight cost me $489 in fees and the difference points did not cover. I booked 5 nights in a small condo near Kihei, not a resort, not luxury, just a door that did not open into my parents' kitchen. Then I'd you to come tonight. She did not ask if I was crying. Nora knew I did my most dangerous thinking when I sounded calm. What do you need? Every piece of Whitcomb table equipment in my parents' garage. There was a pause, then the sound of her turning off a blinker finally. I sent her the inventory list. Chafing dishes, commercial mixer, carving station, insulated carriers, warming trays, baking sheets, folding prep table. Everything we had bought through Whitcomb Table Catering LLC. Everything insured under the business. Everything stored in my parents' detached garage because my apartment was too small. These are company assets, Nora said. I know, not family property. I know. Good. I'm bringing the van and Marcus from the temp list. At 3:40 that afternoon I logged into the wholesale account and cancelled the grocery order. $640 of turkey, ham, potatoes, cranberries, butter, cream, produce, gluten-free flour, vegan roast and dessert ingredients disappeared from the delivery schedule with one confirmation email. The deposit would return to the business account within 48 hours. I saved the confirmation. Then I saved copies of the invoices, the equipment inventory, and the LLC operating summary into a folder on my laptop, not because I wanted a fight, because I knew my father would call taking back my own property betrayal if I did not have paperwork by evening. Deborah was moving slower. Her hands hurt. I saw her reach for the spice box June had kept on the counter, then stop, as if even touching cinnamon required permission. You're quiet today, she said. I'm thinking. About Christmas? About a lot of things. She looked at me then, really looked, and for 1 second I thought she might ask the question that would have changed everything. Are you okay? Do you want to do this? How much have we taken from you? Instead, she said, what time are you starting tomorrow? I folded a dish towel and set it down. I'm not sure yet. At 9:30 that night, Ray was asleep in his recliner with the television still flickering over his face. Deborah had taken pain medicine and gone upstairs. Troy was in the basement with headphones on, laughing at something on his screen. At 10:12, Nora backed the Whitcomb Table van up to the detached garage. The side door opened quietly. Cold air rushed in. Marcus nodded once and started lifting the heavy pieces without a word. Nora checked each item against the inventory on her clipboard. Chafing dishes, carving station, mixer, insulated carriers, sheet pans. Piece by piece, the false magic of my family's holidays left the garage. When the last carrier slid into the van, Nora looked toward the house. This is the last free event they ever get from you. I nodded because if I spoke, I might come apart. After she drove away, the empty garage looked almost peaceful. Inside, I wrote the letter by hand. I placed it under the salt shaker because Deborah always reached for salt before she started potatoes. I wrote that I had cooked 136 family meals since 2011. I wrote that I loved my family, but love was not a reason to disappear inside the work. I wrote that the equipment in the garage belonged to Whitcomb Table Catering LLC and had been retrieved. I wrote that the wholesale order had been cancelled before delivery. I wrote that if they wanted Christmas dinner, they could divide the work, hire a caterer, or learn how to cook. At the bottom, I wrote the only sentence that mattered. I am not ruining Christmas. I am only removing the work you never admitted I was doing. Before I left, I stood in the kitchen one last time. The counter was clean, the sink was empty. The stove waited like it still believed I would come back to it. I placed June's ledger in my bag. I did not take her spice box. That belonged to my mother, whether she understood it yet or not. I touched the lid with 2 fingers. I learned to leave, I whispered. The drive to Columbus took 90 minutes through cold, dark roads and the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Halfway there, my phone lit up with a text from Deborah. "What time are you starting tomorrow?" I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I did not answer. Not because I did not love her. Because I did. Because if I answered, she would pull on the softest part of me, and I would turn the car around. At the airport, I turned off the family group chat and texted Nora. "I'm boarding." Her reply came almost instantly. Finally. At 1:05 in the morning on December 24th, the plane lifted out of Ohio. I looked down at the lights shrinking beneath the wing and thought about turkey still frozen in some warehouse, potatoes no one would peel, and a kitchen on Sycamore Lane that was about to wake up without me. For the first time in 13 years, no one was waiting for me to make Christmas happen. Chapter 4. The Imble Kitcheny. Learned most of what happened next from my mother, from Nora, and from the kind of small-town silence that never stays silent for long. Deborah woke up on December 24 before sunrise because that was what women in my family did before holidays. They woke up before the house needed them, before anyone thanked them, before anyone even thought to wonder how the coffee, the thawed turkey, the peeled potatoes, and the clean counters appeared. She went into the kitchen looking for the order sheet. There was no order sheet. She opened the pantry first. No bulk potatoes, no bags of cranberries, no gluten-free flour, no vegan roast tucked on a shelf, no extra sugar, no cream, no butter stacked in boxes the way it always was when I was cooking for a crowd. In the refrigerator, she found eggs, a container of leftover meatloaf, pickles, half and half, and 2 takeout boxes from a diner Troy liked. Then she went out to the detached garage. The storage wall where Whitcomb table catering equipment had been stacked since 2022 was empty. No chafing dishes, no warming trays, no insulated carriers, no commercial mixer, no carving station, no prep table. Just clean squares on the concrete where the equipment had sat long enough to leave pale outlines. She went back inside slowly. The salt shaker sat on the counter, exactly where I had left it. Underneath was the letter. My mother read it standing up at first. Then she sat down at the kitchen table because her legs gave out before her face did. I did not write that letter to hurt her. I knew she would be the first one to find it. Maybe that was why I wrote it as gently as I could while still telling the truth. She read the line about 136 meals. She read the line about the equipment belonging to Whitcomb Table Catering LLC. She read the line about the wholesale order being cancelled before delivery. Then she read the sentence at the bottom. "I am not ruining Christmas. I am only removing the work you never admitted I was doing." Deborah looked at her hands after that. That was what she told me later, not at the stove. Not at the empty pantry, her hands. Swollen at the knuckles, dry from years of hot water, trained to reach for work before anyone asked. Then she looked at June's spice box on the counter. My father came in a little after 7, still tying the belt of his robe. "Where is the food?" That was the first thing he said. Not "Where is Alara?" Not "Is she all right?" Not "Why would she leave? Where is the food?" Deborah handed him the letter. He read it once, then again, his face turning the color it always turned when anger had nowhere useful to go. He called me. I did not answer. He called again. Then Troy came thundering up from the basement, hair flat on one side, phone in his hand. "What happened? Mom, did you forget the order?" Deborah looked at him. "Alara cancelled it." Troy laughed once, like that had to be a joke. "What do you mean cancelled it?" Ray slammed the letter on the counter. "She took the equipment too." Troy's expression changed then. "Not because he missed me. Because he remembered Melanie Harding was coming." Ray said, "She wouldn't dare." My mother's voice was very small when she answered. She already did. By 8:30, Troy was at Brookhaven General Market trying to turn panic into confidence. Bill Paxton, the manager, was behind the service desk with a holiday sweater vest and the tired face of a man who had already told 12 people there were no more hams. Troy said he needed to reinstate the Whitcomb order. Bill looked it up, then shook his head. That order was cancelled last night. My family needs it. It was under Whitcomb Table Catering LLC. It's for our Christmas dinner. Bill tapped the screen. Your name isn't on the account, Troy. Troy tried to argue, but there was nothing to argue with. The order had been placed through my business account, cancelled before delivery, and the truck had already been rerouted. No turkey, no ham, no cranberries, no miracle waiting in the back. He called 2 catering companies from the parking lot. One laughed because she thought he was joking. The other said their next opening was after New Year's. So Troy did what men like Troy do when a woman's invisible labor disappears. He bought the visible leftovers, 8 rotisserie chickens from the deli case, already drying at the edges, 4 bags of frozen mashed potatoes, 2 cans of cranberry sauce, a tub of fruit salad, 2 pumpkin pies, rolls, paper plates because he forgot we owned real ones, $417 on his credit card. When he carried it all into the house, Ray stared at the bags. This looks like a gas station buffet, Troy snapped. Then you cook. For the first time in my memory, my father did not have an answer. Christmas Day arrived anyway. Holidays do not pause because the women holding them together finally step aside. The first guests came around 12:15. Wesley Grant and 2 men from the dealership walked in laughing, carrying nothing because Troy had told them not to bring anything. One of them sniffed the air and said it smelled like grocery store chicken. Troy laughed too loudly. Ray had spread a white sheet over the folding table because he could not find the tablecloths. The cranberry sauce still held the ridges from the can. The mashed potatoes were hot on top and cold in the middle. The rotisserie chickens had been carved into uneven pieces that looked less like dinner and more like evidence. Deborah tried to fix what she could, but her hands were bad that morning. She moved slowly, quietly, apologizing to people who did not yet know what she was apologizing for. Then the Hardings arrived. Melanie came in first, her coat buttoned neatly, smiling in that polite way people smile when they are still deciding what kind of house they have entered. Behind her were Jean Harding, solid and observant, Linda Harding with a gluten-free dessert in a small bakery box, and Claire, who looked at the table and saw immediately that the vegan option was lettuce and regret. Melanie leaned toward Troy. Where is Ilara? Troy did not even hesitate. Work emergency. Catering thing. Ray heard him and picked up the lid like a serving tray. That girl is always busy. Couldn't be helped. Melanie looked at the foil pans, then at Troy. Did you help her prep any of this? Troy shrugged. She usually likes doing things her way. Did you pay her? His jaw tightened. She's my sister. Melanie's face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Wasn't this supposed to be her Christmas too? Troy looked away. At that moment, I was in Kihei with a paper cup of coffee in my hand and salt air on my skin. I had slept badly, but I had slept without setting an alarm for turkey. I took one picture, just my hand around the cup, the blue edge of the Pacific behind it, morning light on the water. I posted it with one sentence. Merry Christmas from Maui. First holiday in 13 years I didn't spend in someone else's kitchen. I did not tag anyone. I did not need to. Melanie followed me because Troy had once bragged that his sister ran a catering company. She saw the post while standing 10 feet from the sad table Troy had pretended was a family tradition. She held up her phone. Troy. He glanced at the screen and went pale. Jean Harding leaned close enough to read it, then said the caption out loud. The room changed. Wesley looked from Troy to the chickens. Wait, your sister is in Hawaii? Someone near the doorway muttered. I thought she was catering this. Ray forced a laugh. Ilara has always been dramatic. Deborah stood by the counter with both hands gripping the edge of her apron. She said nothing. And that silence was different from all her other silences. It did not protect Ray. It simply stopped helping him. Then the back door opened. Aunt Ruth Gannon walked in, carrying a tin of butter cookies in one hand and a thin folder in the other. My father looked relieved for half a second, like Ruth had come to save the meal. She had not. She set the cookies on the counter and looked at the table, at the canned cranberry sauce, at Troy, then at Ray. Ruth, thank God, my father said. Maybe you can talk some sense into Ilara. Ruth took off her gloves slowly. No, Ray, I came to talk sense into you. Troy stepped forward. This is family business. Ruth opened the folder. Inside were copies of pages from June's ledger and a printout of my Maui post. She looked around the room at Melanie, Jean, Linda, Claire, Wesley, Mrs. Carney by the doorway, and the people who had come expecting a holiday dinner built on someone else's unpaid hands. Then maybe family should have handled it before turning it into a dinner party. No one moved. Ruth turned to Troy. How many Christmas dinners have you cooked in this house, Troy? For the first time that day, the silence in that kitchen did not belong to me. Chapter 5. The comes due. Troy stared at Aunt Ruth like she had asked him to solve a math problem in another language. My father tried to step in because that was what he always did when Troy ran out of usefulness. Ruth, this is not the time. Ruth did not even look away from my brother. That is what you always say, Ray. It was not the time when June was too tired to sit down. It was not the time when Deborah's hands started swelling. It was not the time when Elara paid your bills. Somehow it is never the time until people can see you. The room stayed still. Troy shifted his weight. I did not ask for all of this. Ruth turned her head then, slow and sharp. You invited 25 people and told them not to bring food because your sister would handle it. That is asking. You just never used the word please. My father's face hardened. You are humiliating us in our own home. No, Ray, Ruth said. Elara has been humiliated in this kitchen for 13 years. You are just uncomfortable because people can finally see it. Then she opened the folder. She did not make a speech all at once. That would have been easier for my father to dismiss. Ruth handed Linda Harding a copy of one page from June's ledger, then gave another to Mrs. Patricia Carney, who had arrived late with a pie and was still standing near the back door, with her coat half unbuttoned. My mother, June Whitcomb, wrote down 162 major meals from 1978 to 2010, Ruth said. Guest counts, dishes, costs. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Easter, birthdays, church dinners. Do you know why? No one answered. Because no one else was counting. Deborah looked down when she heard June's name. Later, she told me she could smell cinnamon at that moment, even though nothing in that kitchen had been baked. Marcia Whitcomb, one of my father's older cousins, stood near the hallway with her purse tucked under her arm. Her voice was thin but steady. June used to say she just wanted 1 cup of hot coffee before the dishes started. Ruth nodded. After June it was Deborah. After Deborah it became Elara. Since 2011, Elara has cooked 136 family meals. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, 4th of July, Mother's Day, Father's Day, birthdays, barbecues, Sunday dinners. Nobody called it work because if they called it work, they would have to admit someone was getting it for free. My father scoffed, but it came out weak. She liked cooking. Ruth looked at him. Being good at something does not make you public property. That was when Jean Harding turned toward Troy. Not angry yet, just assessing, the way men in insurance assess damage before naming it. Ruth pulled another paper from the folder, and while we are discussing what family means, this house was not saved by pride. It was saved by Elara. My father barked my name like a warning. Do not. Ruth kept going. $15,700 for the property tax lien in 2021. $7,450 for the furnace in 2022. $12,300 for the roof in 2023. $35,450. The room changed again. Wesley Grant, who had joked about grocery store chicken an hour earlier, looked down at his paper plate and stopped moving. Melanie's face went quiet in a way Troy should have feared. Ruth looked at my brother. So when you called this house your venue, Troy, you were standing in a house your sister helped keep over your head. Ray slammed his hand on the counter. Elara had no right telling you our private business. That was when my mother did something small, but small things are sometimes the first crack in a wall. She reached into the pocket of her apron, took out my letter, and laid it on the table. She left this, Deborah said. Ray glared at her. Deborah did not pick the letter back up. Ruth read the last line aloud. I am not ruining Christmas. I am only removing the work you never admitted I was doing. No one laughed. No one called me dramatic after that. Melanie turned to Troy. Did you ever ask her if she wanted to spend Christmas with us instead of serving us? Troy's jaw tightened. You do not understand my family. Melanie put on her coat. I understand enough. He reached for her arm, but she stepped back before he touched her. The problem is not dinner, Troy. The problem is that you thought your sister owed it to you. Linda gathered her bakery box. Jean did not say anything to Troy, which somehow made it worse. Claire paused beside my mother and said softly that Deborah did not need to apologize for him. Then the Hardings left. After that, the party collapsed in pieces. Wesley and the dealership friends left without asking for leftovers. Mrs. Carney touched my mother's sleeve before she went. You raised a good daughter, Deb. I hope you know that. By 2 o'clock, the house that was supposed to prove Troy was ready for a bigger life looked exactly like the truth. Cold mashed potatoes, torn foil, chicken bones, a white sheet sliding off a folding table, and my father standing in the middle of it with no one left to impress. I did not know all of this while it was happening. I was in Kihei, sitting near the water with June's ledger open across my knees. My phone was still mostly silent because I had turned off the family chat. I watched waves fold over themselves and wrote one new line beneath my grandmother's last page, Chris 2024, 0 guests. 0 unpaid meals. First time. I thought I would feel triumphant. I did not. Freedom did not erase guilt in one morning. It did not make me stop loving my mother. It did not refund 13 years. But my back did not hurt. My hands were not red from dishwater. My coffee was still hot when I finished it. A week later, Brookhaven knew enough. Jean Harding mentioned the dinner at Rotary, not as gossip exactly, but as a warning about what people call tradition when they do not want to call it unpaid labor. First Methodists started talking about a fair potluck system. Pastor Gregory Miles opened the fellowship hall in January for something Linda Harding jokingly named Give the Cooks a Break, potluck. The women who usually carried the holidays were told not to bring the main dishes. The men who usually asked what time to show up were told to cook, order, or stay home. Nora called me after the Henderson Tool and Die luncheon and said it went beautifully. She had used temp staff and rental backup, and Henderson wanted to discuss a quarterly contract, worth about $18,000 a year. 3 women from church asked for spring catering quotes after they realized I had been the one behind half the meals they remembered. The work my family treated as free had a market value after all. Ray and Troy tried one more angle. They told Nora I had stolen equipment from the family garage. Nora did not argue with them. She sent the invoices, inventory list, insurance paperwork, and operating summary to Diane Mercer, a CPA and small business attorney who had helped us with Whitcomb Table. In January, Diane sent a demand letter. The equipment belonged to Whitcomb Table Catering LLC. It had been stored at the garage, not gifted. Any accusation that I had stolen it could damage the business. She attached records of what I had paid toward the house and offered one clean way forward. Stop lying, stop threatening, and start repayment if they wanted to make it right. Troy lost Melanie. At the dealership, Wesley and the others stopped laughing about my sister handles everything. Under pressure from Ruth, Diane, and finally Deborah, Troy wrote a check for $3,000 and signed a repayment agreement, $500 a month for 48 months as the first stage, then a review of the remaining balance. It was not forgiveness. It was not even close to full repayment. It was the first bill after years of free service. Ray never apologized. Not then. Maybe not ever. He told people I had overreacted, but the story no longer belonged only to him. That was its own kind of justice. In March, my mother asked me to meet her at Cedar Bell Diner on Route 9. She looked smaller than I remembered, but clearer somehow. She slid the check copy and repayment agreement across the table with both hands. I know it is not enough, she said. I did not say it was fine. I said, it is a start. She looked down at her coffee. I read your letter every week. I waited. You did not break Christmas, she said. You did what I never had the courage to do. The words hurt because I had needed them years earlier. But late truth is still truth, I told her the new rule. If the family wanted me at a holiday, I would come as a daughter. I would sit at the table. I would eat while the food was hot. I would bring one dish if I chose to, and if they wanted a full dinner, they could book Whitcomb Table Catering, sign an agreement, pay a deposit, and receive an invoice like everyone else. Deborah nodded. Your father may not understand. I picked up my coffee. He does not have to understand for me to be free. When I left Cedar Bell Diner, I carried a check, a repayment agreement, and something quieter than victory. I had not been paid back for 13 years. I had not been handed a perfect family, but the bill had finally been placed on the table. I was no longer the girl waiting in the kitchen to be thanked. I was the woman who took back the work they had mistaken for tradition. If you were in my place, would you have warned them first? Or would you have let them walk into that empty kitchen and see the truth for themselves? And do you think Deborah deserved forgiveness after staying silent for so long? Let me know what you would have done.